Episode 3, Dead Reckoning. An Alistair Finch Mystery. Part 1. The sky over Hertfordshire had the washed-out look of old tin, the kind that promised neither rain nor mercy. It lay low and heavy above the fields, pressing down on the small airstrip like a lid not quite sealed. Detective Inspector Alistair Finch stood just beyond the chain-link fence and watched a plane come in. It was a Cessna 150, white with a blue stripe sun-faded almost to grey. It came down steadily, obediently, the way a thing does when it trusts the ground to be there when it arrives. The engine note softened as the pilot flared, wheels kissing grass with a gentle bump that Finch felt through the soles of his shoes. He didn't know why he was watching so closely. He'd never cared for flying. It offended him somehow, the men pretending gravity was a suggestion instead of a rule. Behind him, someone cleared their throat. D.I. Finch. Finch turned. The speaker was a man in his early 40s wearing a flying jacket that had once been brown and now looked like old tea. His hair was clipped short, his face lined in a way that suggested long hours squinting into wind and sun. Detective Sergeant Tom Wilkes, the man said, offering a hand. Local CID. Sorry to drag you out of town. Finch shook it. You didn't. I needed air. Wilkes smiled faintly, unsure whether that was a joke. They stood together, watching the Cessna taxi in. The propeller wound down with a tired whine. That one of yours? Finch asked. One of ours, Wilkes said. Staple of the place. If these things ever stopped flying, half the county would be stranded. Looks flimsy. Wilkes shrugged. So do most people, if you look long enough. They walked through the gate and across the grass toward the hangars. The air smelled of cut turf, aviation fuel, and something faintly metallic. Finch noticed the sounds first: engines idling, distant laughter, the clatter of tools. A place like this hummed with casual confidence. People trusted machines here. That always made Finch uneasy. The flying school sat on the edge of the airfield like a converted farm that had learned new tricks. Low buildings, corrugated roofs, a cafe that doubled as a briefing room. A windsock hung limp, embarrassed by the stillness. So, Finch said, "Tell me about the body." Wicks's jaw tightened. Senior instructor. Name was Alan Brewer. 49. Former RAF, transport, not fighters. Civilian instructor for nearly a decade. Well liked. Steady. The sort of man you'd trust with your daughter. Finch didn't comment on that. They were doing circuits, Wilkes continued. Touch and goes. Basic student stuff. Brewer was in the right seat. Student in the left. Plane went up fine. Came around once. On the second turn, the engine cut. Completely. That's what the lad says. Silence. Brewer took control, tried to glide her in. Almost made it. Almost, Finch repeated. Wilkes gestured toward the far end of the strip, where darker grass marked disturbed ground. They clipped a fence post. Nose went down. Propeller shattered. Brewer took the impact. And the student. Broken arm. Shock. He'll live. Finch nodded slowly. Accidents happened. He knew that. But he also knew when he was being sent for something that wasn't meant to stay an accident. Why am I here? He asked. Wilkes hesitated. Because Brewer knew his aircraft. Because the engineers swear the Cessna was sound. And because, he lowered his voice, Brewer told someone yesterday that if one more thing went wrong around here, he was going to make a noise about it. They reached the hangar. Inside, another Cessna sat with its cowling open, engine exposed like a ribcage. A young man in oil-stained overalls looked up, eyes wary. That him? Finch asked. Maintenance, Wilkes said. Name's Gareth Mills. He's been here 6 months. Finch met Mills's gaze. The lad looked tired. Not guilty, just worn thin. Anyone else fly that aircraft recently? Finch asked. Wilkes shook his head. Brewer had it booked all morning. They moved past the hangar to the edge of the field. Finch stopped where the grass had been churned up, where metal fragments still glittered like dull coins. He crouched, picked up a shard of propeller. It was lighter than he expected. "Funny thing about flying," Finch said quietly. "Everyone assumes it's heroic. Brave men defying the sky. But really, it's just systems. Fuel. Air. Timing. Take one away." Wilkes finished it for him. "And gravity remembers you." Finch stood. "Who called it in?" he asked. Wilkes nodded toward the cafe. "One of the instructors. She's inside." Bit shaken. Finch glanced at the building. Through the window, he could see people gathered around mugs of tea, voices low. Familiar posture. The way people gathered after something went wrong, not quite ready to admit how close it had come to being them. "Let's talk to her," Finch said. As they walked, Finch felt it again, that prickle at the base of his spine. The sense that this place, so open and trusting, was hiding something brittle underneath. And somewhere above them, the sky remained indifferent. Part 2. The cafe smelled of burnt coffee and damp wool. It had been a mess hall once, long before flying schools and civilian dreams, back when men ate quickly and left without talking about it. Now it tried to be welcoming, with chipped mugs, aviation posters curling at the edges, and a blackboard menu that still listed bacon rolls even though they'd run out hours ago. Finch stepped inside and felt the conversation thin around him. There were 6 people seated at mismatched tables. Instructors, Finch guessed. Pilots had a look about them, alert even when sitting still, hands never quite idle. One woman stood apart near the counter, arms folded tight across a shearling jacket. "That's her," Wilkes murmured. "Name's Margaret Hale. Flew with Brewer more than anyone." Finch nodded and approached. "Miss Hale," he said gently. "I'm Detective Inspector Finch." She looked at him for a long moment before answering, eyes red but dry. "I know who you are," she said. "You've got that look." "What look is that?" "The one that says you won't be leaving us alone anytime soon." Finch allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "I'll try to be polite about it." She gestured toward a table. "They Saturday. You were here when it happened?" Finch asked. "Yes. I was on the ground. Watched them take off." "Anything unusual?" Hale hesitated. "Only in hindsight. That's usually how it comes." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Alan wasn't the nervous type. Ever. But this morning, he double-checked everything. Walked around the aircraft twice. Argued with Gareth about something under the cowling. Argued how? Quietly. Alan didn't shout. He got cold. What was it about? He didn't say. Just told Gareth to log it properly this time. Finch glanced at Wilkes, who made a small note. "Did Alan have enemies?" Finch asked. Hale laughed, short and humorless. "Only the kind you get when you care too much." He'd been pushing management about maintenance schedules. About cutting corners. Did management listen? They smiled. Same as always. Finch nodded. He was about to ask another question when the cafe door opened and a gust of cold air swept in, followed by the sound of boots that didn't belong to anyone trying to be quiet. "Christ," a familiar voice said. "Smells like a funeral in here." Finch closed his eyes for a brief, resigned moment. "Cindy," he said, without turning. Cindy Lawless stood in the doorway like she owned the place, or at least like she didn't believe anyone else did. Her coat was too thin for the weather, her hair pinned up in a way that suggested speed rather than care. She scanned the room, clocked the tension, and grinned. "Well," she said. "That explains the police cars." Wilkes stiffened. Hale looked confused. Finch stood. "What are you doing here?" Cindy shrugged and walked in, already pouring herself a cup of coffee without asking. "Friend of a friend flies out of here. I was supposed to meet him. Instead I meet you. That's either fate or very poor planning." She glanced at Hale. "Sorry about your colleague." Hale blinked. Do I know you? No, Cindy said cheerfully. But I know places like this. And people who get leaned on in them. Finch shot her a warning look. Cindy. What? She said. You brought me into worse rooms than this. Wilkes cleared his throat. D.I. Finch, who is? A civilian, Finch said quickly. With a talent for being where she shouldn't. Cindy raised her mug in salute. Hale studied her, then Finch. You trust her? Finch hesitated. Just a fraction too long. I trust her to notice things I won't, he said. Cindy's smile softened, just a touch. Well, Hale said, exhaling. Then you might want her to hear this. She glanced toward the window, lowering her voice again. Alan thought someone was messing with the planes. Wilkes frowned. Messing how? Small things. Fuel caps not seated properly. Tools left where they shouldn't be. Nothing provable. Just wrong. Cindy leaned in. Anyone betting on your students? Hale's eye snapped to her. There's a bookie who hangs around on weekends, Hale said slowly. Down by the fence. Never causes trouble. Never do, Cindy said. Until they do. Finch felt the shape of it forming now, not clear, not complete, but unmistakably there. Who benefits? Finch asked. Hale swallowed. The school's been struggling. There were talks of selling. Brewer was against it. And the buyer? Finch asked. Hale shook her head. Never met them. From outside came the distant whine of an engine starting up. Finch felt his shoulders tense. He stood. I want the maintenance logs, he said to Wilkes. All of them. And I want to know who's been on this field after hours. Wilkes nodded. I'll get on it. Finch turned to Cindy. You're not involved. She smiled sweetly. Of course not. Go home. I will, she said. After I take a walk. Finch sighed. Cindy. Relax, she said quietly, the humor draining from her voice. I won't touch anything. I'll just listen. That was what worried him. As she headed for the door, Cindy paused and looked back. You know, she said, planes don't fail like that unless someone wants them to. Then she was gone, swallowed by the wind and the open field. Finch stared after her, unease settling deeper into his bones. This wasn't just about a broken engine. It was about someone who understood systems. And someone who knew exactly where to break them. Part 3. The wind had picked up by late afternoon, worrying at the windsock until it finally remembered its purpose. It pointed east now, stiff and accusatory, as if blaming the sky for what had happened on the ground. Finch stood beside the wreckage again. The aircraft had been moved to the edge of the field, what remained of it roped off with a professional sadness. The nose was crumpled inward, aluminium torn and folded like paper. One wing sat at an unnatural angle, the strut bent in a way Finch couldn't look at for long. You won't find much by staring, Gareth Mills said behind him. Finch turned. The young mechanic held a clipboard like a shield. Humor me, Finch replied. I'm very good at staring. Mills sighed. The engine seized. That's what everyone keeps circling back to. But it doesn't make sense. In what way? Finch asked. It didn't overheat, Mills said. Oil pressure was fine. Fuel was there. It should have kept running. Should have, Finch repeated. Mills nodded. Engines are honest things. They fail loudly. This one just stopped. Finch crouched, peering into the cowling. He didn't know engines, not really, but he knew human interference when he felt it. Walk me through the fuel, Finch said. Mills hesitated. The tanks were topped off this morning. Standard procedure. Checked visually. Sumped properly. Anyone else touch it after? Finch asked. Mills shook his head. No. Just Alan. Finch straightened slowly. You're sure? Mills met his eyes. As sure as I can be. That wasn't enough. The student pilot sat alone in the briefing room, hands wrapped tightly around a mug he hadn't drunk from. His name was Peter Rawlins, 22, engineering student, halfway to his private license. His arm was in a sling, his face carried the stunned vacancy of someone who had just learned how thin the margin really was. Finch pulled up a chair. "Take your time," he said. Rawlins nodded. "It was quiet," he said immediately. "That's what scared me." "Quiet?" Finch prompted. 1 second the engine was there. Then it wasn't. No coughing. No warning. "What did Brewer do?" Finch asked. Rawlins swallowed. "Everything right. Trimmed for glide. Picked his field. Told me exactly what was happening." "And you?" "I froze," Rawlins said. "I was useless." Finch shook his head. "You survived." Rawlins looked up. "He didn't." "No," Finch agreed. "But he kept you alive." That seemed to matter to the young man. He nodded, eyes shining. "One more thing," Finch said. "Did you smell anything?" Rawlins frowned. "Smell?" "Fuel," Finch said. "Oil." Rawlins hesitated. "No. Nothing." Finch leaned back. That made two things that didn't belong. Cindy Lawless walked the perimeter like she belonged to the wind. She stopped where the fence sagged near the betting window, little more than a hut really, timber walls darkened by rain and years of casual corruption. It wasn't official. It never was. But it operated with the quiet blessing of people who didn't want questions. Inside, two men spoke in low voices. "You said it was handled," one muttered. "It was," the other replied. "Just not cleanly." Cindy leaned closer, heart ticking faster. "You can't afford another incident," the first man said. "The school's already under scrutiny. It'll sell faster this way," the second said. "Tragedy knocks the price down." Cindy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Finch reviewed the maintenance logs that evening. They were immaculate. Too immaculate. Every box ticked. Every signature neat. The kind of paperwork that existed to protect someone rather than record reality. He closed the file slowly. This wasn't vandalism. It was planning. And someone had chosen a man who trusted his aircraft too much. As dusk settled over the airfield, Finch stood alone near the runway, watching a lone Piper Cherokee lift off into the dimming sky. The engine note was steady, reassuring. Until it wasn't. The plane vanished into cloud. Finch remained where he was long after the sound faded, knowing now, with cold certainty, that Alan Brewer hadn't been the first warning. Just the one they'd failed to hear. Part 4. The hangar doors groaned as they slid shut against the evening wind. Inside, the light had gone thin and yellow, casting long shadows across wings and fuselages. Aircraft slept here like obedient animals, trusting the hands that fed and tended them. Finch walked between them slowly, fingers brushing cold aluminium, listening to the echo of his own steps. Cindy Lawless waited near the far wall, arms folded, jaw set. "You look like a woman who didn't go home," Finch said. She smiled without humor. "I look like a woman who learned something." "Then start talking." She nodded toward a Grumman AAR-5 parked under a torp. Two men. One of them's been around before. Not staff. Not a pilot. Smells of aftershave and cheap confidence. And the other? Didn't speak much, Cindy said. Didn't need to. The talk was about timing. About inspection windows. Finch's stomach tightened. "They mentioned Brewer by name?" he asked. "No," Cindy said. "Which means he was assumed." Finch looked away, eyes tracing the rivets along a wing. "You said something about selling the school." "Yes," Cindy replied. "And about lowering the price." That fit too neatly. The owner's office was a cramped room above the cafe, smelling faintly of tobacco and old ambition. Ronald Taverner, The proprietor sat behind his desk like a man already rehearsing explanations. "I run a flying school," Taverner said stiffly. "Not a murder factory." "Then you won't mind explaining the sale negotiations," Finch said. Taverner's mouth tightened. "There are no negotiations." Finch placed a folder on the desk. "There are. And they accelerated last week." Taverner stared at the folder as if it might bite him. "The buyer?" Finch pressed. Taverner exhaled. "A development firm. They want the land." "And the planes?" Finch asked. "Liabilities," Taverner snapped. "Insurance headaches." "So a fatal accident helps," Finch said quietly. Taverner stood. "That's obscene." "So is cutting corners on maintenance," Finch replied. "So is ignoring your senior instructor when he raises concerns." Taverner's voice dropped. "You can't prove anything." Finch nodded. "Not yet." Later, Wilkes joined Finch near the runway, face drawn. "We found something," Wilkes said. "Fuel sample from Brewer's aircraft." Finch's heart kicked. "Contamination?" he asked. "No," Wilkes replied. "Absence?" Finch frowned. "Explain." "The gauge read half full," Wilkes said. "But the usable fuel was far less than it should have been." Finch closed his eyes. Fuel starvation. The simplest betrayal of all. "Someone drained it," Wilkes said. "Or made it look full," Finch replied. Wilkes swallowed. "That's deliberate." "Yes," Finch said. "And subtle." They both looked skyward as another aircraft passed overhead, engine droning steady and ignorant. Finch returned to the wreckage site one last time before nightfall. He crouched again where Brewer had died and imagined the cockpit, Alan Brewer's calm voice, the student frozen, the sudden silence where power should have been. He imagined Brewer checking gauges, trusting numbers that had been lied to. Trust, Finch thought, was always the weapon. Cindy stood a little apart, uncharacteristically quiet. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" she asked. "That someone wanted a crash without fire," Finch replied. "No explosion. No spectacle. Just enough death to look like fate." "And that Brewer nearly beat it," Cindy added. "Yes," Finch said. "Which means whoever did this might try again." Cindy's eyes narrowed. "With another plane." "Or another instructor," Finch said. The wind rose again, rattling the hangar doors. Somewhere in the dark, Finch knew, someone was counting on silence. He intended to deny them that comfort. Part 5. The trouble with aircraft, Finch thought, was that once they left the ground, the truth followed them far too slowly. The radio crackled in the operations office just after dawn. "Skyhawk GBLNE requesting clearance for circuit training." Finch snapped upright. "That's Brewer's route," Wilkes said sharply. "And his aircraft," Finch replied. They were already moving. The Cessna 172 sat on the apron, nose pointed obediently toward the runway, dew clinging to its wings like sweat. Instructor Malcolm Reed stood beside it, clipboard tucked under his arm, chatting easily with a young trainee whose helmet was a size too big. Finch felt the cold certainty settle in his gut. "Stop that flight," Finch barked. Reed looked up, startled. "What?" "Now," Finch said. "Engine off." Reed frowned. "Inspector, with respect, we're already late." Finch vaulted onto the wing, ignoring protocol, ignoring the shouts. "Fuel check," Finch said. "Again?" Reed hesitated, then complied. The trainee watched nervously as Reed dipped the tank. Empty. The gauge inside still read a reassuring quarterfall. Reed went pale. "My God," he whispered. Finch slid down, heart hammering. "That aircraft doesn't fly." Wilkes was already on the radio, grounding the rest of the fleet. Someone nearby cursed. Someone else slipped quietly away. They caught him near the hangar's rear entrance. Dennis Crowley ran like a man who hadn't expected to be chased anymore. He stumbled on the gravel, Finch tackling him hard, the two of them rolling against a stack of oil drums. Crowley sobbed immediately. I didn't mean, he gasped. I never meant the second one. Finch hauled him up by the collar. Who told you to touch the fuel? Crowley shook his head violently. No names. He said no names. Wilkes cuffed him. You'll talk. Crowley sagged. They said it had to look like pilot error. That insurance would sort it. That no one would dig. Finch felt the rage rise, old and familiar. And Brewer. Crowley's eyes filled. He wasn't meant to die. Finch released him with disgust. None of them are. The name came anyway. It always did. Ronald Taverner broke within the hour. He sat across from Finch in the same office, his hands shaking now, the performance stripped away. I just needed one accident, Taverner said hoarsely. Just one. To collapse the valuation. And if the first didn't take? Finch asked. Taverner looked at the floor. Finch nodded. You planned redundancy. Outside, an aircraft engine started unexpectedly. Wilkes's head snapped up. That's not on the schedule. Finch was already running. The beagle pup lifted cleanly from the runway, sunlight flashing off its canopy. Finch skidded to a halt, heart in his throat. That's an unscheduled flight, Wilkes said, breathless. Solo. Finch grabbed the radio. Unknown aircraft, this is D.I. Finch. Return immediately. Static. Then a voice, young, uncertain. Finch? This is Eddie. Finch closed his eyes. Of course it was. Eddie, Finch said evenly, forcing calm. Do not climb. My engine sputtering, Eddie said. Fuel pressures dropping. Finch looked at Wilkes. It's happening again, Wilkes whispered. No, Finch said. It ends now. Finch seized the microphone like a lifeline. Eddie, listen to me. Level out. Best glide speed. I can't see the numbers. Feel it, Finch said. You've watched enough takeoffs to know. The engine coughed, then died. The silence on the radio was unbearable. I've got fields, Eddie said at last. Straight ahead. You land, Finch said. You land and you walk away. The second stretched. A distant thud echoed across the airfield. Then, static. Then Eddie's voice, shaky but alive. I'm down. Finch sagged against the jeep, breath leaving him in a rush he hadn't noticed holding. Wilkes clapped him once on the shoulder. You saved him. Finch shook his head. He saved himself. By afternoon, arrests were made. The airfield was quiet again, planes grounded, innocence temporarily restored. Cindy found Finch sitting on a crate, cigarette unlit between his fingers. You okay? She asked. No, Finch said. But it'll do. She smiled faintly. That kid, Eddie. He's asking about flight school. Finch looked out across the runway. He's already learned the hardest lesson. What's that? That gravity doesn't forgive, Finch said. But people sometimes do. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The case wasn't finished. But the sky, just for now, was safe. Part 6. The airfield smelled different after a death. Not worse, just emptier. The hangars stood open, their shadows long and hollow, as if the aircraft themselves had exhaled and never quite drawn breath again. Mechanics moved quietly, voices subdued, tools handled with the kind of reverence usually reserved for churches and graves. Detective Inspector Alistair Finch stood at the edge of the runway, hands in his coat pockets, watching a Cessna being towed back into its shed like a wounded animal. Wilkes joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one over without a word. They'll ground the school for weeks, Wilkes said finally. Months, Finch replied. CAA won't touch this lightly. Wilkes nodded. Taverner's solicitor rang. Wants to talk mitigation. Finch snorted softly. He can mitigate himself straight into prison. The accounting. The formal charges were laid out with bureaucratic precision. Manslaughter for the death of Malcolm Reed. Conspiracy to endanger life. Fraud and falsification of maintenance records. Taverner's money did nothing for him now. Insurance refused to pay. Investors vanished overnight. The flight school, his pride, his vanity, became evidence. Crowley, thinner and quieter already, agreed to testify. "Did you understand someone could die?" Finch asked him during the final statement. Crowley swallowed. I thought planes were safer than that." Finch closed the folder. "They are. Until people touch them." The boy who walked away. Eddie Pike sat on the grass near the perimeter fence, knees drawn up, eyes following a gull riding the thermals overhead. Finch approached slowly, as if nearing a skittish animal. "You did well," Finch said. Eddie shrugged. "Did what you told me." "You did what you knew," Finch corrected. Eddie hesitated. "Will I get in trouble?" "No," Finch said. "You'll get a story." Eddie smiled faintly. "I don't want stories. I want to fly." Finch considered him. The stubbornness. The quiet hunger. "There are safer ways to start," Finch said. "And worse ones." Eddie nodded, absorbing it like a creed. They stood together in silence, the wind tugging at Finch's coat. Cindy found Finch later, leaning against his car. "You look like hell," she said cheerfully. "Occupational hazard." She handed him a folded slip of paper. "Names. Taverner's friends. People who like shortcuts." Finch raised an eyebrow. "You didn't have to." Cindy smiled, feral and bright. "I know." She turned to leave, then paused. "That kid, Eddie. He's going to orbit you, you know." Finch exhaled. "God help him." "God's busy," Cindy said. "That's your department." That night, Finch returned to his flat. It was still too small. Still smelled faintly of old paint and loneliness. He sat at the table, coat still on, listening to the city breathe through thin walls. He poured a drink he didn't finish. On the mantel sat a photograph he hadn't thrown away yet. A woman. A younger Finch. A girl on his shoulders, laughing. He turned it face down. "Not tonight." Final log. Before sleeping, Finch wrote a single line in his notebook. Sabotage doesn't start in the air. It starts with the lie that no one will get hurt. He closed the book. Outside, somewhere beyond the rooftops, a plane passed overhead, steady, purposeful, alive. Finch listened until the sound faded.